Greetings and welcome to Conversations at Noon on the Connecticut Freedom Trail. I'm Tammy Denise. Today we have an exciting program with the Executive Director of the Discovering Amistad. But before we get to that, let's do a little housekeeping. In 1995, the General Assembly established the Connecticut Freedom Trail to recognize and acknowledge designated sites in the struggle for freedom within the Black and African communities. Such sites include museums, cemeteries, grave sites, private homes. The Freedom Trail is the oversight of the Amistad Committee. We have a couple of programs that we hope you will join us for, such as this Saturday at the Old State House here in Hartford. We will have an encounters in regards to the Amistad trilogy that we have been focusing on for the past couple of months. And also we have the Amistad Affair that will be scheduled for May 9th that was rescheduled from our missed program in February. So we hope that you'll be able to join us then. And also, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to put them into the survey and we will answer as many as we can. Now, Paula Mann-Agnew is an experienced educator, administrator, and social justice advocate. She is the Executive Director of Discovering Amistad. And before joining Discovering Amistad, Ms. Mann-Agnew was the Director of Programs in a large multi-service faith-based organization in Hartford for over 20 years. In addition, for over 15 years, she has taught classes in psychology, social work, and African studies at the University of Hartford, University of Connecticut, and Eastern Connecticut State University. Before we actually see Mrs. Mann-Agnew, we are actually going to watch a video to set up her presentation. So I hope you enjoy it, and we'll see you on the other side.
On a dark July night in 1839, a group of 53 Mende Africans aboard the cargo schooner Amistad lay shackled together below decks in the cramped, damp hold. They didn't know where they were or what their fate was to be, but their hunger for freedom was stronger than their fear. Breaking out of his shackles using a nail, Sengbe Pie gathered the other warriors, seized a number of sugarcane knives, burst from the hold, and took the ship by force. The schooner had been their prison, chartered to take them to a Cuban sugar plantation where they faced enslavement. But by breaking their bonds, the Amistad became the vehicle by which they would win their freedom. This was hardly the beginning nor the end of their story, however. The Amistad Africans had been kidnapped from their homes in Mendeland, Sierra Leone, and forced aboard the slave ship Takora, with some 500 other souls to spend 2 horrific, traumatizing, and often deadly months, crammed below decks, crossing the ocean in what has come to be known as the Middle Passage. Reaching Havana, Cuba, these 49 men and 4 children were purchased at auction by 2 Spaniards and loaded secretly aboard the Amistad to hide their illegal enslavement. After their famous rebellion, the Amistad Africans, using a combination of ingenuity, resourcefulness, and luck, managed to sail the alien vessel up the coast of North America to Connecticut, where they were captured by the U.S. Navy. With the help of well-organized abolitionists and religious leaders in Connecticut and New York, they worked their way through the U.S. judicial system all the way to the Supreme Court, where they won their freedom. And almost 3 years after they were torn from their homeland, returned to Mendeland as free people. Facing insurmountable odds, the Amistad Africans and their allies did what seemed impossible. To win their freedom, countless people brought what they had to offer, their success born from a multifaceted approach. The Amistad Africans wielded their cane knives in violent rebellion, and later their stories in court and the press. The lawyers used the law to give the powerless a voice. The reporters used their platform to bring the story into the common consciousness. Religious leaders used their pulpits to inspire grassroots activism among the common people. The rich and powerful used their privilege to persuade and support. And the smallest of the Mende children used his quick grasp of English and convinced John Quincy Adams to represent them before the Supreme Court. Their success would not have been possible had people from all facets of society not come together and use the tools at their disposal to stand behind the Amistad Africans who never stopped fighting. Over 150 years have passed since the rebellion aboard the Amistad, and we are still fighting for racial justice. Though our current world is vastly different in many ways to that world in which the Amistad Africans lived, the forces we fight are just as great. However, the people, the tools, and the passion at our disposal are more powerful than ever. The Amistad story remains to this day as a beacon of hope and an example of how change can happen when diverse people make many small steps with a larger goal at heart. Current technology allows people from all walks of life and from anywhere in the world to collaborate and share stories of struggle and hope. And at Discovering Amistad, we are committed to providing platforms for these interactive dialogues with the common goal of activism and meaningful change. Follow us at discoveringamistad.org to see how you, no matter who you are, can follow in the Amistad Africans' footsteps and forge a more just society.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is an absolute pleasure to be here with you today. My part of this Amistad trilogy is going to be a little bit different than what we've been doing for the last couple months. I'd like to focus on a broader perspective about the Amistad story, in particular, highlighting human perspective and stories. So please show the first slide. Thank you. And I've entitled this presentation, Lessons of the Amistad Story Through the Lens of an African-Centered Woman. Next slide. We just saw the video, yes? And so when it comes to this presentation, there are four main objectives that I'd like to meet. And one is to explore the historical account of the Amistad Uprising, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, from a human perspective. I want to be able to elevate the Amistad story from the broader context of the Maafa as well. And I want to be able to connect the lessons and the relevance of the Amistad story to today, and to offer the lessons of the Amistad story from an African-centered woman's perspective. I will start this discussion by acknowledging that the Amistad ship, the 129-foot schooner, is a national treasure. It is the only ship, tall ship of its kind, that is a monument to freedom. The reason why this is significant to us at Discovering Amistad is because the ship itself represents a part of our history. When I say our history, it's Connecticut history, it's national history, it's international history. It's the only ship of its kind that creates a platform to be able to have discussions around racial and social justice. Next slide. So one of the things that we often talk about at Discovering Amistad is that we are a story with a ship, which is a very different perspective, because we are fortunate to have an incredible tall ship. But what's most important about the ship are the stories. It is the story of resilience. It's a story of courage, a story of ingenious. It's a story that relates to all of us. And so rather than focus on the ship and how it's built, we do at times, what's most important to us is to make the connection with the human stories. So at Discovering Amistad, then what we do is we take the ship, as we go from port to port, we connect with audiences, for the most part children, but adults and communities, and have opportunities to talk and focus on racial and social justice. Right. So there is a concept that I'm sure most of you are familiar with. It's called Sankofa. And in West Africa, in Ghana in particular, the Akan people, they developed this concept that focuses on the importance for us to look back on our roots in order for us to be able to learn and take the best of the past to guide us and teach us as we move forward. And it insists that if we do that, whatever we have lost, we will be able to revive or reclaim. And it's with the spirit of Sankofa that I'd like to have this discussion with you all. Next slide. So, in understanding the story of the Amistad, one of the things that we've done at Discovering Amistad is we've pulled out lessons that we feel are relevant to us and us today. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through 8 lessons that we've identified. The last lesson is going to be more specifically personal to me as an African-centered woman. So the first slide. Lesson 1, tell the story from a human perspective. It's so often when we hear stories, there's always a question about who the hero of the story is. So when we look at this Amistad story, it's so important for us to, from a human perspective, keep in mind that the heroes of the story were the 53 Mende. It was because of their focus and their training that they were able to partner with others like the abolitionists and other interpreters and other scholars. But it was their initiative and their focus that led the story. And so from a human perspective, we think about Singbe Pierre, and he was a young leader of his community. As you all know, he was a son of a chief. He was in training through the Poro Society to be a leader. He was a father. He was a son. He was a brother. He was looked up to in his community. So it wasn't a coincidence then that when he was on the ship, that the investment from his community kicked in and he was able to take his leadership skills and lead the uprising. It's so important to be able to look at the human perspective of the story. So it's not just a coincidence that Singbe was able to do this, but it was who he was as an individual and what, as I said, the community invested in him. And if we looked at the other 53 Mende, we would be able to learn so much more about why the success of the uprising is what happened. Dr. Adichie says the worst thing that you can do in studying a culture is to start with secondly. So to start with, this is what happened, but to go back to start from the origins. So when it comes to teaching the story of the Amistad to the students, and over the last 7 years, we've had 16,000 students that have come through our program. And we always start with Sierra Leone, and we start with the people and the personalities and what happened to them in their communities and who they were, and the value of who they are as people long before they got on the ship. Next slide. Lesson 2, and this is a tricky one for most of us. It's so important when we're sharing the story of the Amistad or any of the places on the Connecticut Freedom Trail or telling a cultural story that we make sure that we are really cognizant of our own cultural lens. It's so important for us to be aware of our own worldviews and biases and perspectives. We all have them. It's important for us to be mindful of messages that we have about others, to think about how our cultural lens impacts our view and questions about who do we see in front of us. And there's a few pictures here. They're kind of obsolete, kind of outdated as I look at them, because these are things that happened many years ago. The picture to the left is a picture of looting versus finding. And this was during Katrina. in New Orleans, and you have an African American person who um, was able to get some food for the family. And then we have a white couple that was able to do the same thing. But when it was described in the media, the Black person was looting and the white couple was finding. This um, perspective around who people are based on worldview is really important for us to take a look at. In the other picture here, it's two models, two very cute models actually. Um, but many of you probably saw this advertisement about 2 or 3 years ago, and the what's on the hoodie of the little African American boy. It says, I can't see it from here, but um, the greatest monkey in this zoo or something. It says nothing affirming. Um, the perspective about who this young man is came through because of a cultural lens that those that had to quickly pull the advertisement down realized that took place. So it's so important for us to think about how we're telling a story from our cultural lens. And as I mentioned earlier, these are kind of old examples, but I guarantee you, everybody on this call could probably think of some things that have happened recently, a reflection of listening to and the importance of knowing our own cultural lens, our worldviews, and how we communicate a story. Lesson 3. Next slide. We have to be intentional with our language and our references. At Discovering Amistad, when we're talking about the enslavement of individuals, we talk about enslaved people. We don't use the language of slave. Language is so powerful. And so, a slave, what is a slave? Slaves were reduced to being chattel animals. And so the perspective is dehumanizing. And it makes it seem like a slave is a natural identity, like you're born a slave versus an enslaved person. It maintains the sense of dignity. It reminds us that we're speaking about human beings, and it was a condition that forced the person into that condition, but that's not who the person is. And some of the examples that I included on this slide, when it comes to the power of our language and being intentional, the picture on the right says, so like, what are you? So often in terms of microaggressions, um, people are asked questions like, what are you? Or, um, I don't see color when I look at you. I just see you. I don't see color. Um, Microaggressions in terms of trying to minimize race. And the last one, I can't see the text from here, but it looks like it's it probably says something about how the diction of the young woman. Oh no, this one says you're pretty for a black girl. Pretty for a black girl. Being very intentional about the political weight of things that we say as we're telling these stories and how we are when we are navigating through the realm of social justice. Next slide. Lesson 4. We have to remember that history is often skewed and not inclusive. African proverb, until the lion learns to write, every story will always glorify the hunter. My father used to say to me all the time that there's a difference between his story and history, meaning that there was a lot of incredible information that he wanted to share with me that I would not be able to learn in school and studying history. The last part, history seldom tells her story. And that is just a reminder of the need that we need to be inclusive. So often when we hear the story about the Amistad Uprising, we hear about Singbe, who was an incredible leader. But I'm so appreciative to Tammy Denise through her organization, always highlights the three girls that were also on the ship in her theatrical performances, because oftentimes his story eliminates or minimizes her story. Lesson number 5. It's really important for us to acknowledge the broader context. So often when we tell the story of the Amistad, we zoom right in and we talk about the 53 Mende and how they were captured and what their experience was like on the ship. We jump right in, but it's so important for us to keep in mind that there is a much broader context of what was happening at the time, and that is the Maafa. And Maafa is a Kiswahili word for great disaster, that was coined by Dr. Ani. And it, of course, that refers to the African Holocaust, or the enslavement of Africans over hundreds of years. And so when we think about the Maafa, we also think about the fact that many Afrocentric scholars refer to the Maafa as the greatest terroristic attack in the history of mankind, because of all of the elements that were multi-layered and designed to last over hundreds of years. So when we have this conversation and we talk about the 53 Mende and the fact that they fought for their lives on the ship, they were fighting not only for their lives, but they were fighting not to be trapped in this incredible international human trafficking ring that was very prominent. And they were fighting for their freedom, so that their generations wouldn't be trapped in the system. Next slide. I want to talk a little bit about that international human trafficking ring. And so when we think about the Maafa and when it was being developed, and we all know that it was about a demand for labor, sometimes what we don't remember is that the purpose of it was wealth, it's capitalism, and there was so many countries involved in slave trade: Portugal, Spain, England, France, Denmark, Brazil, so many. And the profits that were involved in the Atlantic slave trade were incredible. Next slide. And I want to mention the reason why the proceeds, the profits were incredible. It was because of this business plan. And I shared that with you. I use that terminology, business plan, because it's important for us to think about the narrative when we talk about this part of our history. It wasn't just something that happened. It was something that was designed. The goal was free labor. The product was enslaved African people. The process was human trafficking. The plan was to overstack ships in terms of the Middle Passage. And not only that, but laws were constructed that supported this business in order to maximize the revenue. There were justifications developed for the criminal tactics, like referring to these people with stories that came from communities, to label them as animals or chattel, or say that this needed to be done for religion. There was a plan for profit, which legalized sexual assault. And there were many enforcements, physical and psychological enforcements, to make sure that the business progressed. Next slide. And so when we also think about this business plan, we think about how embedded into our systems a lot of this became, because of the aspects of the plan, which included destroying family bonds. Marriage was outlawed, destroying advancement, outlawing reading and learning and destroying communications and workshop and worship, not speaking in native languages, not practicing religion, communication, destroying health, um, civic protections, outlawing the rights to assemble, the rights to own firearms, outlawing voting, and supporters, allies that assisted slaves who were persecuted. And the reason why this becomes really important when we think about all of these different elements that were embedded is when we begin to look at the connection of the past and the present, we see the impacts of so many of of these different aspects of this business plan. Next slide. And so lesson 6 is as we are telling the story of the Amistad, it's making sure at Discovering Amistad, we always think about how we have to connect the past to the present. And up here at the top, I use one example, and I use on the left side enslaved Africans working in the fields, and on the right, um, incarcerated individuals. And so we think about the overrepresentation in our systems. And down at the bottom of the screen, we look at social and economic factors which are that all tie into this. So we look at education, we look at food, we look at housing, we look at health. Um, we look at all of these things that when we focus on the Maafa, there's still these elements that still impact our communities today. Next slide. Lesson number 7 is understanding the power in a name. And most of us know that that Singbe Pierre, that was the name given to him by his community. And we all know that his name was changed to Joseph K, and it was changed for political purposes. It was about if his name had a Spanish sounding surname, that perhaps the Spaniards would have been able to win the case and prove that he was from Cuba. But the reason this slide is important is that there's so much power in names, what people name themselves, so much connection to who they are. And oftentimes, because of political purposes, if you look at the course of history, names have been changed in order to have a level of value or status in our world, have a level of freedom based on how you're seen because of what your name is and what it represents to people. Right? Lesson 8. I wanted to tell you a few stories about me um, and how it relates to what I've learned from the Amistad story. First story is if you look at the picture on the right, it's a picture of me and my son. And one of the things I'm often thinking about is what it must have been like to live at the time, 1839. What it must have been like for a mother in Sierra Leone. I think about how difficult it must have been because the threat of being kidnapped in this human trafficking ring is probably something that was so much a part of everyday existence. Fear that I hope this does not happen to me, to my family. I hope this does not happen today. So something as simple as Singbe going out into the rice fields to do his work. I'm sure his mother was concerned. And then I could imagine the nightmare coming true when he did not return. And she was never to see him again. These pictures of my son, and from a African woman perspective, that's something that is near and dear to me. The concern that even today we have for our children, the concern that we have with what might happen to children just because of the color of their skin, their names, what they seem to represent, or the worldview of other people. How systems are still in place that oftentimes villainize um, or see BIPOC children as deviant, as criminal. And so it's one of the things I think about in terms of being a woman of color and understanding the lessons of the story. The picture in the middle is actually when I was in West Africa. I went to a program that was called the St. Joseph Project, and it was an opportunity for the Ghanaians to invite back BIPOC people from around the world. And there was a forgiveness process where they asked for forgiveness for the involvement in the Atlantic slave trade. And I had a very odd experience on that day that sealed for me the connection with the Amistad story. I What you see here in the middle picture was a reception line, and these were the dignitaries from all of the villages, and only very important people were able to get into this reception line to greet these dignitaries. Because I'm from New York, and I guess because I'm from New York, I wiggled my way to the front, although I wasn't supposed to be in the front of this line. And one by one was able to greet these dignitaries. I was thrilled to shake the hands um, and to be able to say, I'm so glad to be here because I've been trying to find my roots, that I did my genealogy and an ancestry, and I found out that originally I'm from West Africa. What I didn't expect is one by one, as I was greeted by these dignitaries, um, there was a level of familiarity with each. I remember the first one came up to me and shook my hand and said, "I'm glad you came back home." And I said, and I thought to myself, well, this is great. It's my first time here, but it's wonderful to be back in the to come to the motherland. And then I remember the second one came up to me and looked me in my eyes and said, "I prayed for this day that you would return." And I thought to myself, that's odd. Um, and then by the time the third dignitary came up to me and also looked me in my eyes, put his hands out and gave me a hug and said, "The ancestors are so pleased that you came back. Thank God for your safe return home." And needless to say, I was hysterical. And I was hysterical because what I realized in that moment is that where I went to West Africa to find my roots in some ways, to learn more about my culture, I didn't know that they were looking for me. I didn't know that it was a twofold experience. And what it reminded me of is kind of the Amber Alert when we put the news out, if someone is missing in our lives. It dawned on me in that moment that for hundreds of years, people were looking for me. And by that, I mean looking for someone perhaps that looks like me, that might be related to them, might be connected. And it was a real personal thing for them. I was looking for my roots, but did not realize that people were looking for me. And it was at that point in time when I realized that I wanted to commit a lot of my skills and experience to making sure that history is kept alive, because it's not just about what's read in a textbook. These stories, the Amistad story, is about people and communities and humans and people that were loved and are loved. It's about a legacy of resilience. It's a legacy of continuing the fight for freedom. At Discovering Amistad, um, the core part of our year is referred to as the Voyage for Freedom. And this is when our ship goes from dock to dock. And I'll share you that slide. I'll share with you the slide in a few minutes. But another quick story down at the bottom on the left is the Door of No Return, Alima Castle in Ghana, that I was able to pass through during on that same day. Up at the top on the left is this is a group of entertainers that were performing one night when I was in West Africa, and they were singing a song, and it was so powerful because as they were singing the song, the words of the song came to me. It was a song that my grandmother taught me, grandfather taught me, and that we've sung in our lives, for our entire lives. But what I realized in that moment is that there's generational songs that were passed down, that if you look in the back of the picture and you see the purple headdress, that's me, who ended up somehow, probably because I'm from New York, on stage singing with this group of people, because the words just kicked in. And what I was reminded of are these stories and the legacy and how connected. We have to make sure that we're keeping the relevance of Amistad story and stories in general, to make sure that we're focusing on human perspectives. Next slide. And so I'd like to stop here and just share with you that these were some lessons that I gathered about the Amistad story, that I thought were real important for everyday life. But I'd like to stop here and perhaps let's open it up to see what other people have in terms of sharing their aspects of the story. And I just wanted to just read this quote: "The greatest lesson I have learned in my life is that I still have a lot to learn."
Thank you so much, Paula. You are not alone when it comes to having to learn. As they say, just because you get older, that doesn't mean the learning stops. You actually, the longer you live, the more you learn. Um,
Yes.
we do have comments coming through, but we're having technical issues. So what we're going to do is just continue to talk until we can
Okay.
actually get these comments to come up.
Sure.
I really appreciate your support with what I do with Sarah Magu, because it is important to tell the story of the three young ladies that were there. And I remember when I first learned about the Amistad, I was an educator at the Connecticut Historical Society, and it literally took me a whole entire year to wrap my brain around the whole idea of enslavement, chattel slavery, because I knew my great grandmother. So I'm literally 2 to 3 generations away from enslavement. And I knew my great grandmother, and to know that that's what her life was about. So it took me that long to really dive into it. But what I really appreciate about the Amistad story was actually before I even got to the Historical Society, it was Miss Debbie Allen. It took her 13 years to get someone to listen to her. And even though it was done in the vein of Hollywood, it helped to accomplish her goal, which was to get the story out about resilience and how where we come from is so important, because they were resilient. They fought to get back home, and they did not give up against unimaginable circumstances. So I really appreciated her efforts, and she is the reason I know about the Amistad, and she's the reason I dug deeper into the story once I was faced with all of what was there, because it was a 5-room exhibit, and it started
Yes.
in the Africa room, and then it made its way through the story. And yeah, so it was very fascinating, and it was powerful. It was very moving. All right, we were able to get some of the questions to come up. Let's see. Mary asked you what time. She said, someone wants to know, Mary wants to know, does she need to sign up for a time if she goes to the Amistad when it comes to New Haven in May? Does she have to sign up for a particular time?
And so the answer to that is no. Mary, you can just go on the website, take a look at the time when there are open tours, and you can just come in, and you don't have to sign up.
Mike wants to know, thank you. Mike wants to know, when was the Amistad Committee founded?
And so I'm not sure about the Amistad Committee. In terms of discovering Amistad, we were discovered 7 years ago.
Okay, the Amistad
Discovering
Committee,
Amistad.
discovering Amistad, but the Amistad Committee itself was established back in the 1800s. I did know that date. I don't know the exact date, but the Amistad Committee was established during the 1800s, Mike. Adrian wants to know, were the Mindi protective of their women folk, especially, it was probably in 1839 when everything started with the Amistad. Thank you, Mariana. Were the Mindi protective of their women folk, especially on the ship? And that's from Adrian.
Yeah, and so my understanding is that there were 3 girls on the ship, no women on the ship, just 3 girls on the ship. And my understanding is that, and Tammy, you might know more, that these girls were protected. Not only were they protected, but they were instrumental in assisting with the uprising.
Yes. Well, actually, the girls were very protected. They actually had a freedom that the adults did not have. They were allowed to run around the ship. And so that is in a way that helped. That is how they actually assisted Singbei and the others get their freedom, because they were able to help them in ways that they would not have been able to get the help if they were all chained together. So the girls were very instrumental in helping with them getting their freedom. That's an awesome question, an awesome bring out. Thank you so much for that. One of the things that I love to talk about when we do talk about the Amistad is to bring out that human story. I love to talk about what they were taken away from, what they had, because history, his story, and would like to make you think that they were just property, just sitting around waiting to be plucked. But no, they had families, they had universities, they had different languages, they had different skills, and they were people. Most importantly, they were human beings who had lives ahead of time. And then to know that that was the catalyst that kept them holding on, because they were trying to get back to what they had. So they fought real hard for that, you know? And so it goes to show you how important family really was to them. Let's see. Bessie asked, does the group work with the Amistad Center in the Wadsworth?
We, Discovering Amistad, we did partner with them several years ago. I've been executive director for 2 years, so when I first came, but we definitely are looking forward to continuing to partner. As a matter of fact, it's looking forward to partnering with all of the Amistad entities throughout Connecticut. One of the things that we are so proud of, in Connecticut, is that the kind of story impacted so many different areas in New Haven and Farmington and Hartford and that kind of thing. And so the ability to be able to partner and work together is just, it's really exciting.
And you know, that's the exciting part about the Freedom Trail, is how so many of the sites are connected to the Amistad story. And there's so many stories of different individuals who played a role in helping them to get their freedom. And one of the people that I do like to speak on is Mrs. Freeman in Farmington, with the boarding house that helped them out. There was Dwight Jane. He was an abolitionist in New London. If it wasn't for him, letting the outside world know, meaning when the two captains decided to bring him aboard the Amistad to brag about their accomplishments and their achievements of kidnapping them, and they actually told him the real story, that they were kidnapped, that they didn't
Yeah,
belong
yeah,
from Cuba. And
yeah,
he had the courage to go back and tell and say, hey, hold on, this is not right. And so he was that ally that was much needed. And so he's the catalyst that really helped to get them put into the spotlight.
yeah.
Lauren asks, she says, you mentioned the African community choosing names. So it wasn't the mother choosing. And do you know what the name Singbe means and how he got his name? So the first one is, did the mother do the choosing of the names of the children?
I think you know what the point that I wanted to make is that there is importance to names in general and how people are named and why. I'm not sure of what the practice was in terms of naming. I'm not sure if you are, Tammy, but the importance of for us not to minimize the significance of names, and not only that, but how names are politicized.
Mm-hmm.
Even today, there have been studies that look at hiring practices, and those professionals that come in highly qualified but have ethnic sounding names are less likely to be hired. And so it's the importance of the power of names. But I don't, I'm not real sure about the naming practices. One of the things I wanted to preference in the beginning is that I'm not a historian. Social worker and educator is who. So those connections with kind of the human aspects of who we are and impression is really important to me.
She also wanted to know, do you by any chance know what Singbe means? And which I think you just asked and answered. And did the
Yeah, I
Portal
do.
Society do the name choosing of the names? I can speak to the Portal Society to a little bit, not saying I'm professional because I'm not. The Portal Society is very inclusive of their people, as well as the Sandy Society. So if you're on the outside, it's not a whole lot you're going to know. So I don't know if that was part of it. It's possible that they do have a particular name that's chosen once they're part of the Portal Society, but don't quote me on that because I honestly do not know. That is something, an inward in society thing that's done.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
we don't really know a whole lot about that. I think if you wanted to know a little bit more about the naming, Marcus Rediker's book, Amistad Revolt, may have more information for you, Lauren, in regards to that part of it. Let's see, do we have any others coming around? No. Okay, so we're waiting. Please let me know if you have any more questions or comments.
There,
Um,
there are a few more slides that focus on the scheduling. If you want to
oh,
pull those up in the
oh yeah,
meantime.
yeah, yes, we could pull up the slides for the schedule.
Oops.
Uh,
Okay. So something wonky happened with so you can't really tell, but if you go to the website, you're able to see where the ship will be. And I'd like to invite everyone to come and visit. Right now, we are in Norwich, and we'll be in Norwich until Friday.
Nice. And Norwich is at One American Wharf. New Haven starting May 1st through May 5th. Stamford, you'll be at One Harbor Point Road, May 8th through June 5th, and Mystic Seaport Museum, June 6th through June 14th. You're going to be in Martha's Vineyard, June 15th through the 21st. New London, June 23rd through July 18th. Mystic Seaport Museum, back July 19th through the 31st. New Haven is August 2nd through the 21st. Bridgeport is August 21st through the 29th. New Haven again, August 29th through September 5th. Then you're in Norwalk, September 5th through the 16th. Bridgeport, September 16th through the 28th. Middletown, September 28th through October 14th. And then back at Mystic
Back to Mystic.
Seaport for October 18 onward. Then we do have another question. Do you have a sense of how the Amistad story transformed perceptions of the abolition movement in New England from being considered a radical fringe movement to achieving general public acceptance and support? I like that. And that's coming from Mike. So Mike wants to know,
Yes, hi, Mike. Can you repeat? I didn't hear the last part of the question.
He says, do you have a sense of how the Amistad story transformed perceptions of the abolition movement in New England from being considered a radical fringe movement to achieving general public acceptance and support?
Mike, what I could tell you is that it's something about timing with this. In 1839, when the Mende were captured, and how the abolition movement in this area was just spreading, and the fact that the abolitionists were able to partner with the Mende in this cause, it completely escalated. Um, the success of the abolition movement in this area, not only in this area, but it became kind of a standard for New England and for the entire country. But it was that connection with the Mende. It brought a lot of publicity and a lot of support and a lot of galvanizing around this initiative with the abolitionists.
Now, I'm not sure if this is a comment or a question, but it said it was shortly after England outlawed slavery. Okay, they're saying it was shortly after England had outlawed slavery as well. And that's from Mariana. Thank you, Mariana. So
Hi, Ariana.
so thank you. Wow, this has been so exciting. I really appreciate you coming, Paula, to share your experience as a woman who's in this field. In the historical and museum field, you don't see a lot of us, meaning marginalized women or Black and brown women in the historical field. And we don't see a lot of us on the level that you are. So thank you so very much for the hard work that you do.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you so much for, your passion. You are a wonderful storyteller. You're very natural, very conversational, and it just draws you in. So I really appreciate you sharing your stories of Africa. But the one thing that I really thought about was when you talked about your son, how as a mother who has a son or who inherited a son, you think about what life is like for them as Black men, and you do see the parallels of the history from past as well as today, and you do worry, and we have to have that special talk. So you think about the talk that you have today versus the talk that they had in Africa about and it's the same thing. It's the same thing. It may be on a different context, but in reality, it's the same thing. And so you wonder when they walk out the door, will you see them the way they left? Will you get to see them again? So that's here we still have today, and hopefully it is something that will change soon.
And I think that I love the comment as well, and I think that part of it is that is the exact reason why we have the Amistad ship and why we have the Voyage for Freedom, because it gives us opportunities to talk further about making change with young folks. It's helping them to tap into when they learn about Margru, when they learn about Singbe, and they understand they were young leaders, but young people to understand that they have leadership skills too. And they could tap into their leadership skills. So a lot of the work that we do is helping them to amplify that youth voice, and for them to be able to find how they will be leaders and how they will be change agents, in their community. And the other part of it is that opportunities for us to have freedom forums, to have conscious conversations, and to be able to work together. Because what's really powerful is that it was the community that came together to support the Mende, and it will take every one of us in our communities in order to be a player. And the questions always come up about, what can I do? How can I be an ally? How can I support? And and what I'll say is that is work for each of us to do in our own way. Whatever we have, everybody contribute kind of what you have. And the Amistad really is a great model, for how this works. So thank you so much for inviting me, and I look forward to seeing you at the ship.
Yes. And thank you, everyone, so much for tuning in and supporting us for this Conversations at Noon. Again, this weekend, this Saturday at the Old State House, we will be doing encounters talking about the Amistad from the artistic perspective. Tuesday, May 9th, will be the continuation of the Amistad trilogy for the rescheduled program of Conversations at Noon with Charles Warner, Adrian Joy Burns, and myself. And we just like to thank you so very much for tuning in. We really appreciate you supporting us. Again, if you have any questions or comments or anything that you would like to see us present, please feel free to fill out the survey and we will do our best to honor those wishes. Again, thank you so much for taking time out of your day. And until the next time.